gentlemen, welcome into a special episode of the New Fashion Conservatives podcast. I'm your host, Justin Phillips. With me, as always, is the one and only Shadow Governor Voss.
Robin Voss's strongest soldier.
And also joining us today is a very special guest, friend of the show, and friend of mine, Wisconsin State Treasurer, John Leiber. John, welcome. So I was going to start off by saying that I've known John for a really long time. So first as a staffer for State Senator Van Wanggaard, while I was working on his recall campaign in 2011. John was an awesome door knocker there, one of the best. And then working as a legislative assistant in the Capitol, I would often pop down to his office and chat with John for stretches that were probably too long for him and boring, but he was always a fun guy to talk to. And since then, John has gotten married. He's gone to law school. Of course, he's become the top elected GOP constitutional officer in Wisconsin, serving as the state treasurer. He was first elected in 2022, earning almost 1.3 million votes, and he's recently announced he's running for re-election. So, John, for listeners who might not be familiar, why don't you give us a little bit more on your background?
Sure. So I've lived in Wisconsin my entire adult life, and my family goes back here 7 generations. My mom does genealogy. She looked it up. And we did the math, and that's actually before Wisconsin was even a state. So my family's been here longer than Wisconsin. But it's growing up, I grew up in Racine County, which is why you met me involved in Van's campaign way back when. I never thought I'd really be doing this, but it's been really exciting. So I grew up in Racine County in Caledonia on the north side, and I went to UW Parkside. And after that, I didn't really know what to do. I actually did a little substitute teaching for a while. And then I met somebody running for state senate. It was actually before Van. It was Kathy Stepp back in 2002. And I didn't really care about the race at all, but my mom said, oh, you should come along to the event. And I filled out a sign-up sheet to, I don't even know what it was for. But they called me. I said, sure, I'll come help get signatures. And ever since then, I've been involved in politics in one way or another. And it just started out as a volunteer. I even ran for local office a couple times, and then I got my job in the Capitol. And after that, I ran for state assembly in 2018, and I lost. And I decided I'm done with politics. This is it. I'm fed up. Don't want it anymore. I'm going to go to law school like I always wanted to. And as soon as I got out, I ran for state treasurer and won. So it's hard to get the whole politics thing out of your blood, it turns out. And I come from a long line, well, not a long line, but my mother actually was in politics. She worked in D.C. for a congressman way back in the 70s. So I kind of always appreciated public service ever since then, and never thought I'd do it, but now that I'm here, it really does kind of fit well.
Very nice, very nice. And, I know that obviously the state treasurer's office, you are our highest constitutional office, so we appreciate you. And we'll obviously get into the electoral juggernaut that you are and how you mastered winning statewide, along with, Ron Johnson, the only two to do it in recent memory. But to actually get into some of the nuts and bolts, for a lot of people, and I think even a lot of people that are connected in politics, they don't know the actual duties of treasurer.
Myself included.
Yeah.
To refresh myself. So, John.
Yeah, take it away. Give us the rundown. I mean, you've got now basically a full term under your belt here. So what exactly are your duties and, what you've done already, maybe stuff you want to do? Feel free to take that any way you want.
Sure. Well, I'll start with, so I'm a member of one of the nonpartisan state treasurer organizations, and they have a motto: if you know what one state treasurer does, you know what one state treasurer does. Because every single state treasurer around the country does something different. They have a little different portfolio. So Wisconsin, let me start with what I don't do, but used to be done in the state treasurer's office. Years ago, the state treasurer used to maintain the deposits of all the state funds and do the investments and accounting. That was taken away. That was the cash management portion was back in the 90s, I believe. The state treasurer's office used to do auditing for the government, for the state government. That was taken away back in the 60s. State treasurer used to do local government investment pool, like taking all the the money from the municipalities and stick it in one bigger pool and make money while it just sits there. That was taken away. And last, it was the college saving program, the 529 EdVest program. State treasurer used to do that, and that was taken away. And the last thing that the treasurer did that was taken away was the unclaimed property program. And that was taken away in 2014, 2015. So yes, what's left? I am on the board of the BCPL, the Board of Commissioners of Public Lands, and we invest $1.6 billion of a common school fund. So that started out when I first took office, it was only $1.4 billion. So it's actually gone up. And of that, we invest the money, and per the state constitution, we have to give everything we make to school districts. So this last year, we gave over $70 million to various school districts, which helped defray the cost of, well, it helps lower property taxes in the end because that's less money they have to levy to raise to fund their school libraries.
Very nice.
And technically, I also promote the unclaimed property program, but there's no item in the budget to do that and no staff to do it with. So look for unclaimed property. That's that's pretty much what I'd say to people.
Can you explain a little further the Board of Commissioners of Public Lands and what you're doing there that kind of aligns with your or our conservative values?
Sure. So it's a mouthful, and so we usually just say BCPL. So it consists of myself, the board members, myself, the Attorney General, and the Secretary of State. And this was a board that was created in the state constitution back in 1848. And in fact, it's one of the world's oldest a permanent fund, basically a sovereign wealth fund. Norway has one. They put all their oil and gas revenues into it. It funds a lot of their state operating expenses. Alaska has one. They have the Alaska Fund. They fund a lot of their state government operations from it. Unfortunately, Wisconsin doesn't have any oil or gas or natural resources that we can put money into. What it started out with was 3 million acres of state land that was given to us by the federal government. Not the good land either. The act to transfer most of it was called the Swampland Act. So it was basically land that nobody wanted. And what's left is about 70,000 acres. And as you can imagine, it's not the greatest land because that's land that nobody has wanted for over 170 years. So we actually do make some money. We've made about $1 million last year selling timber rights and collecting the revenue from that. So it's not just sitting there as a swamp and vacant. But the board has been tasked with keeping the money, and originally the idea was to use this to fund all of state school operations in a large part. The problem with funding that source with a finite amount of land is once you sell the land and you spend the money, you don't have the land or the money, so you can't really keep doing that. So we've moved on to a situation where it's mostly now property taxes locally and state aid. And the Common School Fund funds just the school library portion of it instead of the bulk of the education expenses. So interestingly, the BCPL did not always focus on raising as much money as possible. For a fund that was supposed to be raising money and give to schools, it was kind of handicapped in a way because the only investments we could make until about 2015 were in U.S. Treasury bonds, which do not exactly pay that much and do not really keep up with the rate of inflation or the market increases. So that changed. And there was also a mindset change at BCPL about the same time. Before that, it was seen as more of a conservation agency. It preserved the wildlife and the forest land and stuff. After that, the investment changed. We also changed the mindset where our job is to make money, and our focus is to make as much money as possible, within acceptable risk standards. So instead of just buying savings bonds, basically, we are now investing in commercial loans and real estate and equities of all types. We still loan money to municipalities and, make money off that, but the bulk of our increases come from basically utilizing the stock market and investments like any other mini hedge firm would do. So that's
no.
Sorry.
Please, I was just gonna ask. So the Board of Commissioners of Public Lands is you, and the Secretary of State, and the Attorney General. So what is it like working with Sarah Godlewski and Josh Call?
It's actually interesting because we've been able to work on the board together by not talking about politics. We're just focusing on the mission of the board. So I do have to give them credit that they haven't brought up any crazy proposals that I've had to shoot down or highlight. Because again, it's two Democrats and myself. So if they really wanted to, they could kind of do all sorts of crazy stuff. And my only response would be to go public with it. So which does help having a Republican on the board. And I'm able to kind of steer things in the right direction by asking questions and highlighting issues. I will say it is funny where I think I probably agree. If I had to pick one of the other board members I agree with more, it's probably Josh Call, because we both have law degrees and we're both a little more conservative on risk, as it were, whereas Sarah comes from a more investment background. She's a little more risk tolerant.
Interesting. Well, and I'm glad you asked that because this is fascinating to me. Just because I had no idea a lot of this, to be quite honest. But I was going to ask about if the partisanship ever comes up. But so what you're saying is that Republicans and Democrats can work together as long as we just exclude any hot button issues and you just really stick to how can we invest a few dollars here and there, and we just take everything else out of it.
Well, I mean, the way I would put it is we're focusing on what the point of the BCPL is. I mean, if we focus on the goals and the public service, we're trying to raise as much money to give out to school districts. If we can all agree that's our goal, then it becomes simpler. If they start trying to do something where saying all the school libraries have to buy this book or something, then you start getting into areas where, yeah, we're going to disagree. I guess there were two votes where we disagreed. I didn't vote to make Sarah the chair of the board, but I lost that 2-1. And the other one was actually a loan approval for a small town up north that is mostly comprised of an Indian reservation. And I voted no to give that town a loan because there's a recent court opinion that said if you are a tribal member and you own property, you don't have to pay property taxes. And our loans are secured basically by land that can be taxed. So if the majority of the town can't be taxed and we give them money and they don't pay, how do we ever get our money back?
Well,
so I said
that's kind of a problem. Now I'm sure it's a pretty small town of less than like 500 or something people.
It wasn't very big, but the tax base was shrinking because every time, this is what the court opinion said, if a tribal member bought land that was not part of the reservation or had been owned by somebody not a member of the tribe, when they bought it, it became tax exempt again, even if they had sold it.
So you're just taking more and more land off the tax roll.
Right. And the problem was the town had been, well, at least what I had heard is the town had been raising tax rates among the few remaining owners who were kind of forced to sell, which meant the tax rates would go on even higher, encouraging everybody to sell. And generally, the only people who wanted to buy property there were tribal members who wouldn't have to pay the tax. So what happens 5, 10, 15 years down the road?
Wow.
All right. So they're just going to default on these loans and then it's going to go back to the rest of the taxpayers? Yeah, okay. So that's a good case.
I will say we did work out a deal that was much better where they accelerated payments. So we actually did get paid back. But my philosophy was, why are we taking this risk on what's otherwise every other loan we've done in this program has been 100% guaranteed. So why even take a single bit of risk? Because these loans were basically at the federal interest rates. These weren't, getting 10, 15%. They were like maybe 4 or 5%. So why take any sort of risk with that type of income potential? It didn't make sense to me. And I said, look, I mean, it's clear they need some money for something, but there's other ways they can get that. So I just didn't see us as being the best risk-taking agency because it's not our money. It belongs to everyone in the state. And I just didn't want to take that risk on that.
Interesting. And so this is just like a microcosm of just one instance. But would you say for the most part, you guys have agreed on a lot of the decisions? I mean, this is maybe one where you guys differentiate. And I know that anything regarding the tribes kind of goes along those partisan lines a little bit, and so I can understand that. But for the most part, are a lot of other things pretty? Are there a lot of unanimous votes? I should say.
Most of them are, just because we're dealing with kind of basic issues. We usually get every meeting, we have a package of loans we're approving. And it's say that the town of Caledonia for a new fire truck for $150,000, or a school district needs some funding for a new building, or a town up north needs some road construction done. So they take out a short-term loan. It's guaranteed basically by their tax base, so we can intercept their state aid if they don't pay. But we've never had a case where they haven't paid. And of course, in Wisconsin, municipalities can't go bankrupt, so we're guaranteed to get our money. So these loans come up and we vote yes, and then we all agree because there's absolutely no risk and we're getting 4 or 5% interest on it. So what's the downside? Some policy things come up. We're generally on agreement, sometimes not always why, and we do kind of tinker with the details of any resolution or position we're putting out. But we generally try to come to an agreement because we're not, well, I'll put it this way. The Attorney General isn't too focused on this agency because it's such a small part of his job. Whereas for the Secretary of State and the State Treasurer, it's more of a role, so we do pay a little more attention. But generally, we try to do the job we're elected to do and the job that we're supposed to be doing on the board.
Gotcha. Well, this has been, that's fascinating, and I feel like I have to be invested a little bit more to kind of, but this is probably so in the weeds that, to go, and I don't even know where someone are these decisions like made public? Where would someone even go to even find them, to even look at what actually is happening?
So our BCPL meetings are actually broadcast live online, and there's in the meeting notice, there's a link to go to. And we also post the minutes on the BCPL website with the audio recording and the written minutes. So everything's public. But yeah, it's not something I get to talk about much, but maybe that's why I sound excited, because as you can imagine, this is not the type of thing I give on a stump speech. I don't talk about the minutiae of the BCPL.
No, that's okay. That's why you're here.
Exactly. That's why we have you on. That's why folks tune in, is to learn a little bit more about state government. So
one last thing. Now, how do people, because now I'm invested, quite literally, how does one just apply for these loans? Like if I, for example, wanted a small loan of $1 million to finance this podcast, to blow it up, like, can I just, obviously not everyone can do this. So what are the kind of the standards, the guardrails on who can get this money and then, eventually pay it back?
Well, the first step is to be a government entity. So if you're a school district or a drainage district or something like that, then you can apply. But I mean, it's actually, I tell people it's actually really great for the state and municipalities. So it's a very competitive interest rate, like basically in line with what you can get, what the federal rate is. It's really quick. Unlike a lot of places, we can get this done in just a little over a month. And there's no prepayment penalties. So you can take out a loan for 5 years, but if you end up getting more tax revenue, you can pay it back. And the bonus to everyone is all the interest we make, we send right back out to the districts around the state. So anything you pay actually benefits the state. So there's a lot of reasons to do it, and a lot of municipalities reach out for basically kind of bridge loans just to get them through an unexpected expense till the next budget. And then they may take out a loan for 2 or 3 years and then pay it back next year when they can budget for it.
But like you said, it's not just municipalities and school districts. You're talking about stormwater districts and drainage districts. You're talking about anything that local municipal government touches. You can get a loan from the state through you guys for.
Right. And it's not limited on what you can use it for. It's for any public purpose. So we've had things for infrastructure, just to pay back another loan at a higher rate that they need to pay off, to just kind of operating expenses, although that's not really recommended for a long-term solution. A lot of fire trucks, snow plows, stuff like that breaks down and you need a replacement right away. So yeah, it's a huge range of things. And there's a lot of municipalities that use it, counties that use it, and then others that have never heard of it. So there's 1,800 different municipalities in the state. So it's hard to get the message out to everybody all at once.
So, okay, actual last question. Because I think this is really interesting. I mean, it's not a huge fund. You said like what, 1.6 billion, 1.5?
1.6 now.
1.6 billion. So, I mean, not it's not no money, but you can't, we're talking about municipalities who, you said a lot of bridge loans but what if is there like an opportunity to maybe expand the fund even greater so that you can offer more municipalities or even larger municipalities maybe larger loans to we've obviously heard some of the discourse between locals about they're reaching funding cliffs and inflation obviously keeps on cutting into local budgets and you have to go to taxpayers and it's just much more difficult than in the private sector. So I'm not saying this is a cure all because of course it's not. But is there a way that we could potentially expand the fund to maybe offer more options to municipalities? As we continue to see the cost of doing government work go up along with everything else.
Well, honestly, like I said before, it's any public purpose, which is pretty broad. So they could apply for a loan right now. The only real limiting factor is how much debt they're already carrying, because by state law they can only go up to a certain amount. So they can't, borrow 100% of whatever their tax base is. So as long as they're under that limit, they can borrow from us. They can apply. Like I said, I voted no on that one loan, but that passed anyways. And in my entire time here, we haven't voted down a loan. Sometimes it's not been approved because they had some paperwork issues, but if a loan gets to us, we're going to approve it because it's already been vetted and it's going to go through. So if they want to, they can apply right now. Like I said, any public purpose, which can be anything, like operation expenses, new facilities, road work, whatever needs to be done, they can apply for it. In the loan terms, we've had 1 year, 2 years, all the way up to 20 years. So it's really flexible. We have money. We have a bunch of money to lend out. So if a municipality wants to do it, we're open to it.
Fantastic. Well, John, I just want to talk a little bit more now about your campaign for re-election. So you've already announced. So tell us, how's the campaign going so far? What are you seeing from support in the grassroots conservatives across Wisconsin, and what's on the horizon for your campaign?
Well, just under a year to go. So, and this is actually earlier than I got in my original campaign. So in 22, I actually didn't jump into the race until April of that year. So I've actually got a head start from last time. So I'm feeling pretty good. Over the last 4 years, I've met, I can't count how many people. I've been in front of, I don't know how many TV cameras and podiums giving speeches, and it's been great meeting everybody. And so a lot of this campaign is going to be reaching some people, but just touching base with the people I've already talked to. And hopefully this time no primary. That would be nice. It's always nice to avoid one of those, but it's going well. I've only heard good things so far, and I feel like I've kind of earned my spot on the ticket this time. I've tried to be as available as possible, volunteering for everything, perhaps more than I should sometimes. But if somebody needs help, or if somebody wants me to serve on something or host a convention or whatever, I say sure, be happy to. So it's going great so far. I expect things will be interesting in all the other races, so I'm happy to have a quiet treasurer campaign this time, at least till the primaries over.
So John Leiber, the ultimate team player, working for GOP candidates up and down the board. That's what I'm hearing from you right now.
Well, and that's honestly, that's one of the reasons I got in the race last time. I really wanted to be a benefit to the rest of the ticket. I felt like we needed somebody running for treasurer who could sound the part and convince people that the money's safe with them, and basically just go out there, be a solid name on the ticket, and kind of talk up everybody else. And that's what I did. I guess it didn't work for everybody else, but it worked for me. So hopefully, yeah, I'll keep doing that this time. But little different results is what I'm going
And,
for.
and it looks like there's been a little bit of attention from the Democrats on this side. I saw a couple of candidates. Do you have any thoughts on them right now, or what they think they can do as treasurer versus what can actually be done?
Well, what's interesting is a lot of people want to run for treasurer, but don't actually want to do the job of state treasurer.
They like the
They
title.
want, yeah, they want the title, and they also want to do a different job. So they want to talk about something that has nothing to do with the state treasurer program or all the programs they
I've
do.
never heard of
They
a
want to talk.
constitutional office doing that before.
Yeah, exactly. So it's always interesting to see what kind of crazy plan they may come up with. And from my perspective, the more Democrats jump in, the better, because they'll try to outcompete each other and come up with outlandish ways to spend our money. And my job's always been, let's just keep doing what we're doing, investing the money, making as much as we can, and putting it out there to help lower property taxes. It's really not a hugely complicated job in a lot of respects, but it is one that you kind of need to focus on what you're doing, because it's a job that can cause a lot of, or a position that can cause a lot of damage if you start talking about things you shouldn't be talking about and making trouble, because a lot of people don't know what the state treasurer does, so they may take their opinions on state budget or financing, because if a Democrat was state treasurer, they could be out there blasting whatever Republicans put in the budget, even though the state treasurer has nothing to do with the budget. Or they could start advocating for things that just aren't even right or even true, because they see what other state treasurers do. So it's a job that I think we need to keep a hold of and make sure somebody in there knows what they're doing and doesn't try to go outside of their realm. Stay in their lane and focus on the job. So I always said I wanted to be state treasurer because I wanted to do the job of state treasurer, not because I'm looking for another position somewhere else. I'm not planning to run for governor or senator or whatever. I just want to be state treasurer. That's why I'm running for reelection.
Now,
And
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but
I was going to say, we have not had a state treasurer reelected in Wisconsin since 2002.
wow,
Wow.
guess I didn't realize it. Now you probably know the history a little bit better than we do, just offhand. How many of those ran for reelection as an incumbent and then lost?
Two of them.
Okay,
The rest did not run.
so a lot of them are one term.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Well, now just to shift to who you might be facing, we talked about this maybe a month ago or so, but forgive me, the only one that is drawing to mind is, and I could be completely wrong if she's running for either Secretary of State or Treasurer, but is it Joe Casta, Samaripa?
She's running for Secretary of State.
She's running for Secretary of State. Okay, see, again, it's hard to get them all squared away. So who is running on the Democrat side that you are aware of right now?
So the guy who jumped in, I think it was 2 months ago, Eric Wilson, he ran for Congress in the 3rd District in 24 and finished in 3rd place out of 3 with 8% of the vote. He's from the Eau Claire area. So that's one possible opponent. The other one is a guy who jumped in just like a week ago, so I haven't had much, what's his name, Devin or something, or Dylan, something like that, from Dane County.
Okay, so and he's brand new, but Eric Wilson, was he the student that jumped in to the 3rd congressional race? Kind of was like he was like a student. I don't even know if he was from like Wisconsin
I know who
originally.
you're talking about. It's not that guy.
It's not that guy. Okay, because that guy, I remember.
Still think about that guy's race. We can
That
talk
guy's
about that another time.
Yeah, that guy's race was very interesting. Was hilarious, but I just couldn't remember. I just know that primary had a lot of people, including Tara Johnson, who is now in the state assembly. So that's a whole other thing. But okay, so it's good to be the incumbent. It's good to be the incumbent.
Yes.
And one thing, obviously, you won where a lot of people didn't win, and there's obviously a message there that resonates. And second of all, I think there's just a kind of like when you talk to the average voter, I think a lot of voters relate maybe Republicans to fiscal security, and and obviously the word treasure just kind of invokes that a little bit. So a lot of people maybe draw that fiscal conservative values with treasure, and they say, well, I just know that a conservative would be automatically better than a Democrat in fiscal conservativeness. I think that that's some people. That's not everyone, obviously. There's a lot of voters out there, but I think generally there are some people that not every voter is an informed voter, unfortunately, where a lot of them might see that and just make that connection. But obviously, with the election coming up, it's going to be highly partisan, and I just think that the Democrats they're gonna be pushing to try to get unified control across the board, every office, every assembly, state senate seat, the governor, all the constitutional offices. So how can we, or I should say, how can you kind of cut through that a little bit and kind of propose your vision for the treasurer's office compared to what'll probably be a pretty contested election?
Yeah, well, so at an event a couple months ago, when the previous head of the Dem Party was giving a speech, he said we're going to keep all the constitutional offices and take back the treasurer's office. So it's definitely, they'd like to take it back, but it's not as easy as it sounds. Like you said, I think there is a lot of residual feeling that a fiscal conservative is probably Republican. And of any of the offices, that's the one we want a Republican in. So that's why I outperformed the rest of the ticket in getting, percentage wise. But what it also tells me is that there are still split ticket voters in Wisconsin. And even if looking at the voting results wasn't enough, I saw during the campaign some of the feedback from all the door knocking and phone calls and all that. And there were voters who would vote for Tony Evers and then turn around and vote for Ron Johnson. And there's also voters who were for some reason voting for Tim Michaels and for Mandela Barnes. So there are people who just will vote for the incumbent, whoever it is. And there's people who vote for the non-incumbent, whoever that is. And there's people who just decide that, I've heard that name, I'm going to vote for that. So I think it's a mistake to think that the only people turning out to vote are all partisan. There are still enough in Wisconsin that are independent voters that can be swayed, that will vote for the candidate. So I think we have to remember that we're not just trying to sell ourselves to the base. We have to convince the undecideds, the independents, who oftentimes want to see themselves as independent, so they want to vote for somebody in both parties. So we have to make the case to them as candidates that, whatever else you're voting for in the other races, vote for me in this one. And if they met you, that's an advantage. If you say something they like, or you have a talking point that resonates with them, that's enough to get their vote, especially in down ballot races where they're not looking that in depth at a lot of things. They're not seeing our commercials because we don't have any TV commercials. They're not seeing us at debates because there weren't any treasurer debates last time, probably not this time. So they have maybe your slogan to go off of, maybe a single yard sign. So you do whatever you can to just get that one impression you're going to get in front of a voter to make the case. And I think that's something we have to keep in mind as candidates, that we can't just rely on our party to carry us the whole way through.
Amen. Amen. And one other thing, kind of regarding this whole thing. So obviously, you currently hold the office, and you did some good work for the GOP, kind of a post-mortem regarding what we did wrong previously, where we can go as a party, and hopefully, forge a way that is much better than what we've left previously. It seems like a lot of things have fallen apart since 2018. And although we do have some victories here and there, we've had a lot of close races. And, it seems like everything is within grasp, but just out of grasp. So talk to us a little bit maybe about the postmortem. And then on top of that, have you seen maybe some of those things been implemented? Maybe if you see things that, okay, we do need to work on this still, maybe there's some positive things that we can take away going forward. And yeah, just your take in that regard.
Yeah, so like I said, I volunteered. Let me know what I can do to help. And this is one of the things I apparently volunteered for ahead of time. So when they said, hey, would you like to be on a commission? I said, sure. Oh, would you like to lead the commission? I'm like, oh, okay. And here you go. So the nice part was RPW is basically hands off. You guys look into whatever you want. We'll give you whatever information you want. We'll even provide a staff to help type up everything and get the research you need. But otherwise, they didn't have any input on what we put together or other conclusions we came to. It really was the commission members who kind of looked through all the information and came to the decision. One thing I really wanted to do with it is not to like use it to point fingers and say this person is to blame, this is the reason why, and all that. I really wanted it to be more of a forward-looking thing, so it would be useful to win elections, because there's not much point in causing another inter-party fight when our whole purpose is to win elections.
Yeah, we have enough of those, and we do that on our own without any other. I mean, we could, if there was just the Republican Party, we would find a way to fight it out. So that totally aside, you are 100% correct.
Yeah, so we really focused on things that RPW could actually implement in time for the next election, and other things that they need to start working more towards. So, like, one of the things that I'm glad to see they have done is they actually have an opposition researcher now. And they had one on a temporary basis once in a while, and I said, that's just not really going to cut it in today's world. And the commission members agreed. We need somebody who is looking stuff up about the Democrats, because we are constantly getting hit with all sorts of stuff from them. And if on our side, every campaign had to do its own work, we're way behind, because I know for a fact they have people doing that full time.
Well, an
So
emphasis on people. It's not just one. They got multiple that do this all year round. And I understand that, they bring in a lot of money. They spend a lot of money too, but they are a full-time operation. And yeah, and so this is great. That's great to hear. That's great to hear that at least some improvements have been made. Some solid steps have been made to at least bring some parity back.
Yeah, one of the other suggestions I had that the reporters kind of twisted, we said that we should be looking to raise money from around the country, just like the Democrats do, because Wisconsin's a battleground state, and the money is going to have much more of an impact here, and it's going to be more important than someplace, say, a Republican dollar in New York or California or something is going to have an impact on a statewide level. Not so much, but here it will. So all the articles were like, report says GOP should raise money from out of state or something, or out of state donors. It's like, it's not like we came up with that. We're trying to match what the Democrats did. A lot of what we talked about in the report is areas where we're behind the Democrats and areas where we need to catch up to them, just at parity. Because if we have that parity, then it's really up to the candidates to win. And if we have good quality candidates, we can win. But if we're starting at a 5 points down before the campaign even starts because our infrastructure isn't there, that's a lot of burden for a campaign to make up. So if we can just get back to equal, we'd be in a much better position.
Amen. Yeah, I totally agree. And again, I'm trying not to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Where I'm glad we have full-time opposition research, but it cannot be overstated for people that are listening that the Democrats have a well-oiled machine that does this year-round, always plotting a year, 2 years ahead, so that and it's almost like clockwork. For example, I see when Hovde got into the race for Senate, boom, they lost. I mean, not that Hovde's like a super private person. He's been around for a while. He's been kind of a known commodity, but they had a clean message that it was united, and they hit him very hard early. And to Hovde's credit, he countered with his own stuff as well. But sometimes it is just really hard to blunt that initial attack, and that's just something that Republicans have not been able to do for a long time. And I just hope that we don't go. And I saw it with Michaels, right after. Now that was a little bit different because he got in late to the primary, and it was a very contested primary. So that was a little bit different with Hovde. I just remember, it was so early. It was very coordinated, very organized, obviously, and it worked. I think in a lot of respects, although Hovde came very close. And I kind of see that a little bit right now. And obviously, our primary is still going on for governor, but the Democrats seem maybe a little bit more hesitant on taking a specific position because they don't know who else is going to get in, if there is going to be anyone else. But I did, you saw some of the tariff Tiffany stuff. I saw a little bit of that, but they haven't like committed to that yet because obviously our primary is still going on. But that kind of stuff really makes a difference, over time. So, but again, it's good that we're at least moving in a positive direction.
That was another point we made in the report also, that money, the earlier the money comes in, the better, and the more useful it is. I think I was talking with somebody, like, if you get $1 million a week before the election, there's not that much you can do with it. If you get $1 million 6 months before the election, you really have a chance to use that to build up your infrastructure and your campaign and everything. So it was also kind of a message to donors that if you're going to throw in a lot of money, do it sooner rather than later. Because like you said, that when the Democrats come out, right out of the gate and bash our candidates, we spend the rest of the campaign trying to crawl out of that hole and get back to a positive image. If we had that money at the beginning to put a positive image about our candidates out right away, it's much harder to tear that down.
Or, of course, putting out a negative image about our opponent. I mean, it works both ways. It cuts both ways.
Oh, yeah.
But,
exactly.
They do a really good job at defining us, and then we are pushing back about that, against that definition. When they're arguing kind of from a position of power, they're telling people and we're responding. Instead, we should be really doing it the opposite, which is why I think Hovde, in a lot of respects, got so close. It's because he was able to do that. Now, obviously, he's a very independently wealthy man. And the kind of New York Baldwin stuff with, her partner and, being the hedge fund manager, like that really, I think, scared them. And it worked. Now, maybe if we had done that earlier, maybe the race is different. Who knows? Anyone's guess at this point because it was so close. But it's the whole principle of defining early instead of, acting instead of reacting.
Yeah. And I mean, I interviewed Brad Schimmel for the report and some other people as well. And that was one of the things they wished had been different, that the money came in earlier, that RPW had the money on hand rather than getting in and right before the election, because there's only so much you can do with it the later it gets. So that's an area. So I don't want to say ulterior motive to the report, but it was also a secondary motivation, was to provide something that RPW can give to donors, especially the big donors, to show that if you're going to donate, chip in earlier than you might want to. And if you give it to RPW, so Wisconsin's campaign finance, you guys, I'm sure know, it's kind of a little interesting. You can give unlimited amounts to the Republican Party of Wisconsin, and then RPW can turn around and give unlimited amounts to candidates. So if there is a donor who wants to donate to the governor's campaign, but they don't know who it is, they can give to RPW right now. And then the day after the primary, all of that money can come in and go straight to the candidate. And the Democrats are doing it that way, is my understanding. They raise money for their eventual nominee and then give it all over. So that's another area we're a little behind in, but I think we need to catch up in if we're going to have a chance.
One, I know that they gave, I think, Susan Crawford like $20 million, I think, something like that. I mean, I don't want to say, I don't believe it was exact. I think Crawford raised herself $20 million. I think a significant portion of that was transfers from the Democrat Party of Wisconsin directly to Crawford. I'm sure she did well herself as well, but I'm sure the Democrat Party did a lot of that as well. So, and I can't remember exactly what Schimmel's was. Shame on me for not knowing that offhand.
It was less direct. So if you look at the total amount, it's about the same. It's just a lot of the Schimmel's money came from third-party groups. So they didn't give actually to him. They spent on his behalf. But I think as anyone who runs a campaign knows, they'd much rather have that money in hand to do what they need to do, rather than hope a third-party group spends it on how they want. And there's also the cost of ads are much higher for third-party groups.
That was what I was going to bring up is, ads on television cost more for a third-party group than they do the candidate. And you'd think that if they want to make that money go as far as possible, maybe at least go to digital. Because there's no difference between $1 on digital versus one from a third party versus a candidate. Whereas you can spend less money as a candidate to buy the same amount of air coverage that a third party group would do. Plus, then you have a better control of the message you're on. You can hit with what you want as opposed to hoping that a third party knows what they're doing, and sometimes it works. Sometimes we've seen third parties kind of swing and miss on messaging. So you're absolutely right there, John.
Yeah, so it's not just the amount, it's the timing of the money and how it's being spent, the efficiency you're getting bang for the buck. So, and we're kind of behind in all that. So those are, I think it's important, even if we don't have the exact solution, that we identify what the issues are so we can get the word out that this is what we need to work on. And there are actually things we can do to improve on that. So first step is identifying the problem. Hopefully RPW has been working on that. I believe they have. They've actually said that we're working on the stuff in the report that we can do. So I feel like they have made progress. I guess we'll see what happens in the Supreme Court election, but at least I know they're serious about changing the outcome from last time.
Well, I appreciate you doing that. I think a lot of us here at the program and listeners appreciate someone taking a look at that, giving us that direction to go to improve things moving forward. Because I don't like losing these races. Nor does anyone. It sucks to get 48.5%, 49.5% of the vote, keep falling short, and having things just out of reach. So, John, with that, we're going to get to our big three questions that we ask every candidate who's been on the show. And the first one is, if you could pick one iconic Wisconsin spot, say it's a supper club, a brewery, Packers game tailgate, to hold a voter rally, where would it be, and what would that look like?
So I'd have to go back to my hometown. Well, technically it's right next door, but the Wind Point Lighthouse. I've always thought that was just a beautiful location. Got great views of Lake Michigan in the background. You got a nice old building there. I just always thought that would be neat. It's a really, I remember it, basically my whole life. So it'd be really neat to have something there.
Yeah.
Oh, of course, there's always the state capitol. Yeah. That's
no, fantastic. Now, so the second question we have is, growing up in Wisconsin and having a family that's been here as long as the state has, what's one lesson from Wisconsin, whether it's a family farm, small town festival, or a hunting trip, that really shapes your conservative approach to leadership?
Okay, so when I was in, third or fourth grade, going to Wind Point Elementary, which is torn down now, but it was, I believe it was an Arbor Day celebration. So we all go outside into the grassy area, and they all give us little tiny trees to plant. So we plant these trees all along the edge of the parking lot, and they say these will grow up one day, and it's really important what you did here and all that. Well, like the next week we come back, and for some reason all the trees have been mowed down. Whoever organized the Arbor Day planting forgot to tell the landscapers that, don't mow down all the little tiny trees. So everything we did was for naught. Everything was torn down. No trees grew there. I think they planted some years later, but for some reason that memory always stuck in my head, and it took me years later to realize that's what happens. It doesn't matter how many good intentions you have or what your intention is to do something if you don't actually communicate what you're doing and why you're doing it to people, because most people aren't paying attention to every little thing you do. And I think it really applies to conservatives in government. You could be doing the greatest things ever, passing legislation, but if nobody knows about it, if nobody knows why you're doing it and what happened, they're just going to pass on by, not even notice it. And just one more article that they don't even bother reading. So I think it's really important to not just do something important and then feel satisfied with yourself and go back and carry on your day. It's do something and explain to people why that's important and how that affects them. Because otherwise, there's no way they're going to know. There's so much stuff going on in the world that the achievements we make as conservatives in government just aren't even a blip on the radar to most people, unless we go out there and tell them about it.
Get that message out there, John. That's what you talked about now with the GOP postmortem, and you're living it now as the treasurer. So, final question: you get to wave a magic wand and roll back one progressive policy in Wisconsin without worrying about getting votes or getting elections or anything like that. So whether it's high taxes or woke gender language and administrative rules, what's one policy you want to roll back?
All right, this one's a little technical. So back in 1996 or 7, I believe, there was an effort by the Thompson administration to reform how DPI and education is organized in the state. And DPI superintendent at the time sued, and we got a decision called Thompson v. Craney, I believe. And what the Supreme Court decided after reading the state constitution is that we can never reform education because the state superintendent must always be in charge of everything in education. And you can't put anyone above that, and they are the sole, person in charge of that. And it has stifled any attempts to really have any educational reform or oversight of DPI or the state education system since then. It's been 30 years almost. And because the Supreme Court was interpreting a constitutional provision, unless we amend the Constitution, we really can't create any sort of new oversight of our state education. The state superintendent has to be supreme over education. So I would really, really like to see the Supreme Court overturn that case and get back to a common sense reading of that amendment that just says the state superintendent and other state officials, it literally says other state officials have oversight of education. The Supreme Court just read into it that the state superintendent is the supreme education authority. That wasn't in there at all. So I would very much like to undo that so that we can actually have some education reform in this state and experiment, because Wisconsin used to be a leader on education. It used to be, pardon the word, progressive about education and implementing new ways and new systems, and was very fond of borrowing from other states and taking what worked and getting rid of what didn't. And we've kind of been frozen ever since then because we're not allowed to innovate anymore because the Supreme Court made a bad decision. So I would very much like to get rid of that.
John, that's amazing. No, this entire conversation has shed light on things that I didn't even know existed, and again, in the treasurer's role in the Supreme Court, and bringing that lawyerly knowledge to the pod is certainly appreciated. So, John, final question: where can listeners go to find out more about your campaign?
So I've got a website, Leiber for Treasurer, and my website. I wrote that down. John Leiber for Wisconsin State Treasurer. That's the other place you can find me.
And that's Leiber?
Yes, it does get misspelled a lot, but it is Leiber.
I'm guilty of misspelling it. I think you're still misspelled in my phone.
It's German, so you say the second vowel.
Yeah.
Leiber. You forget the E even in there, and just Leiber. Perfect.
There you go. Well, John, thank you so much for taking some time today to not only talk to us about your campaign and what you did with the Wisconsin GOP, but to give us a full education on the state treasurer's office and how you're going to lead it into the next election cycle in the next 4 years. So we appreciate you taking the time today. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.